Okay, so greetings, friends. I've been asked to say a few words as director of the International Institute of Peace Studies and Global Philosophy about this crisis in Gaza, Palestine and Israel, this fighting that's going on as we speak. And, you know, what can the Institute do or help or offer? So I want to say a few remarks about that. Because I've got friends in the Palestinian community, and I've seen many of the horrible images and pictures of people dying, civilians and so on. Horrendous. And I've also got friends in the Israeli community who are suffering under these rocket attacks and all the insecurity of that, having to run to shelters and constant bombardment coming over. And so I can see it from both sides, and really what I want to offer is some hope, some guidance, some light, hopefully, which might, I hope, make a difference. In the preamble of UNESCO it says that wars begin in the mind of human beings, dans l'esprit de l'homme in French. Violence is something that festers in the human soul, and it comes from miscommunication, misunderstanding, oppression, what Galton calls structural violence, and the many decades of insecurity that people feel in a given situation, which then erupts from time to time, as we're now seeing in Gaza. What I want to do in this brief talk is to give a bigger picture of the situation. And I'm speaking really as an academic, as a peace philosopher, someone who's devoted maybe 40 years of my scholarly research in Britain and Canada to the search for the solution of peace in a conflict-ridden world. How can we get out of the shards of violence some kind of harmony, some kind of truth-telling that can repair this? In Judaism we talk about tikkun, which is the reparative work that the spirit can do in even the worst situations. If you think about the Holocaust and the horrors of the genocide, it was an act of tikkun to even create Israel in the beginning. I know Israeli friends, most people in Israel have ancestors who died in the Holocaust and got to Israel as a miraculous escape from a war-torn Europe. And the whole of Israel's coming to being was a kind of act of tikkun. Now, that it should then be leading to conflict and violence and death for the Palestinian community is a kind of blasphemy of history, if you want. It's against the ideals of the founders of Israel and the founders of that process of redemptive healing for mankind. The whole purpose of Judaism was to act as a leaven for mankind. The whole idea, if you go back to Moses, the mission of the prophets, was to create a sacred space for mankind, a place for time out energy. Not to add to the woes and suffering of mankind, but the opposite, to lessen the burden for mankind as a whole. Now, that's obviously not happening at the moment, and certainly not for the Palestinian people who are taking this pounding in Gaza. So I want to address what we can do about that, how we can get back on track. What I can offer simply, you see, as an academic, is the fruit of years of reflection on this, some philosophical thoughts and footnotes and guidance maybe. And I'm appealing to people on all sides in this conflict to stop, to think, to reflect. In Judaism and in Islam and in Christianity, study is a form of worship. It's a religious duty. The scholar is actually, the ink of the scholar is worth more than the blood of martyrs. That's a hadith from Muhammad. And my institute's work is premised on that. What we have to do, therefore, is some deep analysis of this problem, how we got into it. Like medical doctors, as philosophers, I always liken the work of philosophy to that of healing and medicine. Pythagoras said, I've come not to judge the world, but to heal it. Okay, so what we're trying to do here is try and assess the cause of these problems, and then some kind of prognosis, diagnosis. And the tool that I'm using here is what I call transpersonal history, which was the fruit of my own doctoral studies at the University of London. Whereby you combine the insights of Jung and Assagioli and Ken Wilber and Abraham Maslow, and depth psychology over the last decades, which has gone very deeply into understanding the nature of consciousness. And you put that together with the traditional historical sciences, and you come up with a depth history, a approach, which is transpersonal history. We're not going to solve this huge crisis at the level of just glossing over, papering over the cracks. One thing that's amazing about the Palestinians and the Jews is they're such passionate people. The Semitic soul is a very passionate soul. It gave us Christ, it gave us Moses, it gave us Muhammad. You know, these people are very deep and intense, and when they feel immensely deeply. And so you can't just like do Nordic style peace diplomacy, everyone sits down, has a coffee and everything's fine. No, it's got to be much deeper than that, and that's what transpersonal history is about. So, and I just want to share a few little reflections on some of the key ideas, some of the issues that need to be addressed. This is ongoing research. Okay, those that don't know, the current Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, his father was a scholar and a historian, and he wrote this extraordinary book here, which I'm holding in my hand, The Origins of the Inquisition in 15th Century Spain. The Prime Minister of Israel's current concern about the situation, if you think about it, is motivated by his knowledge of how the Jews have been persecuted down the centuries. The Inquisition in Spain was a pretty nasty body that persecuted Jews, also Protestants, and anyone suspected of any kind of heresy. And his father spent years writing this book, okay, and died very, very recently. So, as I was saying, most people that live in Israel at the moment have in their family history someone who died in the Holocaust or in a pogrom or was persecuted. Right back to Spain when they were kicked out of Spain in 1492, and that was, I think, a tragic. Well, it was tragic in the sense that Spain lost the Jewish community, but in fact, a lot of them then went to live in the Ottoman Empire. They settled around Safat. A lot of the great Kabbalists, Isaac Luria, many of these geniuses were inspired by Spanish Jewry, which had produced the Zohar, to then attempt this work of tikkun in Safat, to create a redemptive place for the divine to come back into history. This is the idea, the collective messianic work, if you want. Now, so Spain's loss was actually the Ottoman Empire's gain. And for many centuries, the Ottoman Empire lived in peace with the Jewish community. They flourished, they were tolerated, they were given the right to govern their own affairs. And, it's in many ways, if I could invent a magic time machine, I'd go back to 1914 and stop World War I starting. If the Ottoman Empire could have evolved into an ordered devolution of power to its regions, and Iraq, Syria, what is now Israel and Palestine, all would have avoided the current crises and mess and chaos that's going on. But unfortunately, as a transpersonal historian, it's not possible yet to time travel back in time and fix stuff. We have to deal with what we've got, but what we can do is shed light on the present from the past. Now, another book that I want to share is a visionary work by Alec Isaacs, Judaism, Religion and Politics. Now, what Alec Isaacs is saying in this Prophetic Peace is that, and this is a chap who served in the Israeli army in the Lebanon. What Alec is saying is that war and violence are not the way to fulfill Judaism. I mean, he's an observant Jew, but he's saying, look, I don't read in my scriptures, I don't read in the Torah, I don't read in the sacred writings of all the rabbis, that the first thing you do is reach for your gun, You do that at the absolute last necessity. What you do first is you reach for your minds, your reason, your heart, your compassion, and you try and work out a deal with those opposing you. And so what Alec is saying is that we need to achieve a prophetic peace in the region, because nothing else will satisfy the founders and, let's say, the guiding angels of the Israeli people. Dr. John Dee, a great mystic at court of Queen Elizabeth I, and Trithemius, a great European sage, believed that each nation has a guardian angel. Now, whether we interpret that in Jungian terms as a kind of collective unconscious archetype, or whether we believe literally in angels, I leave up to you. But I think as a concept, it's a nice concept. And what Alec is saying is that, you know, the tradition of Judaism is such that it requires a prophetic peace to fulfill itself. But so also does Islam. You know, we need a parallel book, a prophetic peace, Islam, religion and politics, and we need scholars to come forward who are able to articulate that. And we also need a similar one for Christianity. Because my view, as a philosopher of all these different religions, is that they can be harmonised and synthesised and reconciled. If you seriously locked, you know, the greatest minds of Judaism, Islam and Christianity in this castle of the Muses, and you threw away the key and you said you're not coming out till you've worked out a reconciliation harmony, they could be out within a fortnight, actually. You know, they've got very basic common values that they all subscribe to, and also transcendental principles that they can agree on. And that's what we should be actualising, right? So that's you know, this man is a courageous thinker, and he's written that. In the in the Islamic tradition, we have the work of many philosophers, many sages. Mullah Sadra, one of the great philosophers of Islam, was Persian from Iran. And he was an ontologist. He was a believer in God as being. Being flows and emanates from the nature of God. So God is beyond any particular... God is not a tribal deity. God is the absolute beingness within everything that exists, which is what Spinoza said, what Duns Scotus, the great Scottish philosopher, said, and I'm speaking here from Scotland. And if we can get reconciliation at the level of our essential core being, which is what Mullah Sadra would say, then we would actually see that it's a kind of heresy to be worshipping our own little tribal cultural customs, you know, and killing other people who exist also and have the right to exist in the name of my nation or my religion. It's like football teams. If you go back to the level of being itself, we're all ontologically equidistant from the absolute. That was Mullah Sadra's point, and it was also the point of Ibn Arabi, the great sage from Cordoba. I've just got back from a conference in Cordoba. And it's the essence of the Zohar, and surely it's the essence of Christ's teaching as well. That's why he, you know, gave the Sermon on the Mount, and he emphasised mercy and the repair of man's relationship to the absolute. So, but there are some people, unfortunately, who are playing by a different tune. Okay, so I want to just also draw another rather tragic book to your attention, by David Patterson, who's a scholar in the States, A Genealogy of Evil, Anti-Semitism from Nazism to Islamic Jihad. This is published by Cambridge University Press just recently. And this chap, who teaches at the University of Texas in Dallas, has spent a lot of time delving into the deep archives of the Nazi movement, firstly, the Nazi Party, and its anti-Semitic rhetoric. And its particular language use, like, you know, Jews are vermin, Jews are like a bacillus, they ought to be wiped out of existence. It was like a declaration, an ontological declaration of destruction against the Jews just for being Jewish, right? Which was then enacted in the Holocaust. Now, what he then researches is he discovers that at the end of World War II, quite a few Nazi propagandists and people actually ended up in the Middle East. They went to Syria, they went to Egypt, and they transferred those ideas directly to the founders of modern jihadist Islam. We're talking the people that taught Osama bin Laden, the people that taught the founders of Al-Qaeda, and the people that taught the founders of Hamas. The rhetoric in the Hamas constitution that is given in this book, and the rhetoric that is used, you know, in those circles, is almost word for word the same as the Nazi rhetoric, which is we must destroy the Jews. They are vermin. They are bacilli. They're like TB. They're an illness to the planet. There's no like, well, actually the Jews are protected in the Quran. Muhammad loved the Jews apart from when he fell out with some at Medina, but he never declared war on Jews as Jews. He said they are protected people of the book, and a Muslim has a duty to defend them, right? No, there's none of that. It's absolute, utter war to the death and total destruction, which is a kind of declaration of war against being itself. The ontological right to exist of a Jew is negated, and this is why this book is called The Genealogy of Evil, right? And what the author's done, and it's sobering reading, is he's traced the lineage, how those ideas literally came from the Nazi movement down through into these jihadist movements, and then down into the people who are running Hamas and Al-Qaeda and so on, and all its offshoots, the latest one being this ISIS thing that's now rampaging overspill from Syria into northern Iraq, and that has now declared that the Christians of Mosul are going to be killed unless they convert to Islam or pay an exorbitant tax. You know, it's that thinking which is such a far cry from sophisticated, authentic Islam that Muhammad himself, I think, would be turning in his grave at the perversion of authentic Islam. And anyway, so, you know, intellectually this needs unpicking. The role of philosophers and scholars like myself, the role of the Institute, and I would say the role of any intellectuals interested in helping make this peace happen,